He said, now they're going to ask you some very disturbing questions, questions that may make you upset. He said, just answer the question yes or no. Don't think about it. If they say, have you ever killed anybody? Say no. Don't think about what it might feel like to kill somebody. Just say no and focus on the speck. I go to the address and it's this, normal office tower that Rosalind's famous for. And I go up to whatever it was. I think it was the 6th floor. And there's no name on the door, nothing. It's just a door. So I knock on the door and this guy opens the door just a crack and he says, "Are you here for Bob?" And I said, "Yes." So he lets me in and it's a little 6 by 6 foot atrium. But the second door has a big spin dial lock on it, like a bank, right? So he does the dial and there's a woman on the other side. And she said, "Are you here for Bob?" And I said, "I am." So she lets me in and I'm sitting there. And then Bob comes out. I still, to this day, I have no idea if his name really was Bob.
Yeah.
And that's the only name I ever knew him by. But he was like a 6'6", 320-pound, loud, smiling, good old guy. "John, I'm Bob. How the hell are you?" And he shakes my hand. "Come on in." So he says, "Jerry says you're a good guy." I said, "Well, I appreciate it." I said, "He's an amazing professor. He's a great guy." And he says, "John, let me ask you something. Have you ever betrayed a friendship?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't think so. I hope not." He said, "Okay, that's okay. Listen, I want you to do a couple of things for me." He says, "I want you to go to this address. There are going to be some people there waiting for you." And I said, "Like right now?" And he says, "Yeah, right now." I said, "Okay." He said, "Then I want you to call me, or better yet, I'll call you." I said, "Okay." So I go home, I get in my car, I drive out to this equally nondescript building in Vienna, Virginia. 1-story flat building that you would drive past 1,000 times, you would never notice it. So I ring the bell. This guy lets me in. "You John?" And I said, "Yeah, come on in." So I go there and there's a table with 3 chairs on one side and 1 chair on the other. And in the 3 chairs are 3 people who never identified themselves by name, but they identified themselves as being a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and an anthropologist. So I sit down. No hello, how are you? Nothing. I just sit down. I said hello. They all just kind of looked at me. And then one of them says, "Describe your relationship with your mother." And I go, "Oh." I said, "Yeah, my mom and I are close. She's a school teacher and, she's a terrific mother and very nurturing and, took good care of all 3 of us. And, well, what do you say?" And then they're like, "Okay, describe your relationship with your father." So I did. I said, "My dad's a good guy. He's kind of introverted. My mom was the extrovert of the family." "Was your father the disciplinarian?" And I said, "No, actually. My dad's a big, strong guy, and I think he was probably always afraid he would hurt us or something. So no, my dad's a very gentle soul." Then they asked me that question again. "Have you ever betrayed a friendship?" And I said, "I don't think so. Let me think about it for a second." And then the anthropologist says, No, that's the answer we were looking for." And then one of them says, "You're going to need to go into the next room and you need to give us some piss, some blood, and some hair." I go, "Okay." So I went and gave him some piss, some blood, and some hair. And then I left. I went home. I called my fiance. She goes, "How did it go?" I said, "I have no idea. They asked me these 3 weird questions. It took 15 minutes. Then they took my pee, my blood, and pulled some of my hairs out. I get a call like 4 weeks later from Bob. He goes, "You blew the doors off that meeting." I go, "Bob, it was like from Bizarro World. I didn't understand what they wanted. They wouldn't explain anything." He said, "You aced it." He said, "Now we want you to go to headquarters. You're going to have a meeting at headquarters." So I said, "Okay." So I go to CIA headquarters, and I went to like 4 different offices. They asked me 1,000,000,000 questions, and I leave. By then I've gotten married. I go home. She's like, "How did it go?" I said, "I don't have any idea. There's no feedback. There's no reaction from anybody. There's no response. Nothing." Then Bob calls. He goes, "You aced it, man. You aced it." I go, "Bob, there's no feedback." He goes, "No, you don't need any feedback." He said, "They want you in your raw state." I said, "Okay, so what next?" He goes, "Look, they're going to give you a polygraph exam, and if you pass it, you're in." I was a nervous friggin' wreck about the polygraph. I had never taken a polygraph exam. So they scheduled the polygraph, and I was very fortunate in that first polygraph because I had a very respectful, young African-American woman. And so she hooks me up, and it's funny. They put a cuff on you like they're taking your blood pressure, and then they put these electrodes on your fingertips. Then they put a belt around you to measure your breathing. Then they put electrodes on your ankle. And there was one other that they did, like, was it on my temple? I don't remember anymore. So you have to sit there like this and you can't move. You just have to be as still as possible. And you have to answer all the questions yes or no, because the thing doesn't detect anything else. It just detects bodily reactions, increases in your heart rate or respiration, sweating. It's very, very sensitive to sweating. So I called Dr. Post in advance, and I said, "Listen, any advice you could give me, I would really, really appreciate this, because I've gotten so far in the process. I really want this to happen." So he said, "I can't really give you any insider tips." He said, "But I'll tell you something as a psychologist or as a psychiatrist." He said, "You're going to be in a room that has nothing on the walls. It's just a white room with a window. And of course, they're going to be looking at you from the other side of the window as the polygrapher is doing the exam." He said, "There's bound to be a speck on the wall." He said, "Focus on the speck. Think about nothing but the speck." He said, "Now they're going to ask you some very disturbing questions, questions that may make you upset." He said, "Just answer the question yes or no. Don't think about it. If they say, 'Have you ever killed anybody?' say no. Don't think about what it might feel like to kill somebody. Just say no and focus on the speck." I sit down in the thing. She wires me up, and it takes a good 20 minutes to wire you up to this polygraph machine. And I sit there, and as soon as I sit and I'm wired up, I look, and sure enough, there's a speck like straight ahead of me. So I'm looking at the speck. And they start asking you questions. "Have you ever committed a violent felony?" No. "Have you ever used a weapon in a crime?" No. And then they get, into more mundane things. "Are you financially responsible?" Yes. "Have you ever shoplifted anything?" No. "Have you ever taken anything from the office worth more than $20? No. Have you ever had sex with a man?" And she just threw that one at me like a grenade. So I go, "No," which was true. But I could feel my heart going like this, like she's trying to trip me up. And she says, "Let's take a little break. You're sweating profusely. I can tell that you're nervous. I said, yeah, you kind of threw that question out there like a grenade into the middle of the room. She said, it's a standard question. I said, I understand. So I just kind of sat there for a couple of minutes and got my heart rate to slow down. And then she said, I'll be honest with you, you are reacting to one of the questions. Which was bullshit. I was not reacting to one of the questions. But I came to learn later in my career that this is a turd that they throw at you to see how you respond to it. I said, okay. And so she says, I'm gonna consult with my boss, and then I'm gonna come in and we're gonna go back over the question that you're reacting to. I was like, great. So she leaves. And you know that they're right there on the other side of the window or of the mirror. You can't see them, but you know that they're there. So she comes back in and she says, you're reacting to the question about credit card usage. I go, what? And she says, yes. Are you irresponsible with your credit cards? I go, no. I don't have any balance on my credit cards. I pay my credit cards in full every month. I'm still laughing about it all these years later. This is 25 years ago. No, it's 35 years ago. 35 years ago. So she asked me again the credit card question, and I answered no. And then she's like, okay, we're done. So she starts unhooking me. And I said, how did I do? And she said, we're not allowed to say. And she winked at me. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I passed. So I went home and I said to my wife, I think I passed. And then Bob called and he says, they're fighting over you at headquarters.
Love Bob.
Bob was great. It turned out that Bob was the director of HR for the entire CIA. Wow. I would never, ever have even met someone so important as this guy had it not been for Jerry Post. Jerry Post, God bless him, who just died of COVID a year ago. But man, Jerry was good to me, really good to me. Even later in life, he was even better to me.
Yeah.
So, so I got multiple offers from the agency, and I decided not to go into operations right away because I was a Middle East specialist. And
so, sorry to cut you off. Before we get into that, I want to stay on the interview process.
Oh, sure.
It's just funny. So, what were some of the other questions that you mentioned were disturbing that stands out? And why, what is the point of them asking those sorts of questions? Like, what are they trying to select for?
That's a good question. So I didn't know for a long time what the purpose of any of these questions was. 10 years later, I happened to be transferred overseas, and one of my colleagues was a former polygrapher. And I asked him that question. What was the point of all these weird questions? And he said, I can best answer your question with some anecdotes. He goes, look, I've been a polygrapher for 25 years. And over the course of 25 years, I've had people, applicants mostly, admit to every crime you can imagine, including murder. Because they think, oh, this is the CIA, I'm going to do some wet work. They're going to be impressed that I killed this guy in Syracuse and I buried his body under the train tracks, right? Wait, they're not impressed. They're calling the FBI before you can leave the building, and then the FBI is going to come and take you away, which is exactly what happened. So he said, it's the purpose is to rattle you. He said, one of the things that we do, and he said, you may remember this, we always start off by saying, we're not looking for perfect people. We're looking for honest people. So just answer the questions truthfully. And if there's something that you did in your past, admit to it and we'll get through it. That's bullshit. They're not going to help you get through it. They're going to call the FBI and they're going to report your confession that you just made to a federal officer. So if you've done something, if you've committed a felony, don't apply for a job at the CIA and then confess it to the polygrapher. That's not going to work for you. So he told me that, there was a guy who admitted to a murder in Syracuse, and they got him walking out of the polygrapher's office. He said there was another guy. There was a guy that was a janitor of all things, because even the janitors need to have security clearances. You're in the CIA. We have classified stuff hanging up on the walls everywhere you turn your head, and so you get a pre-employment polygraph. You get one after 3 years. That's your probationary period, and then every 5 years for the rest of your career. So he said this was a normal 5-year. They call it a reinvestigation poly. Now, in the hire, and in the 3-year, they ask you what are called lifestyle questions. That is, are you gay? Are you bi? Are you leather? Are you crazy? Are you a pervert? Do you like to beat prostitutes? They ask you all that stuff. After the 3 years, they don't ask you any of that stuff anymore, because by then they figure, we know each other well enough that you're going to be okay. So he said, because they don't ask those lifestyle questions anymore, he would always throw an extra question in at the end, open-ended. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important? 99% of the people say no. Some people say, what do you mean? He said, well, to this janitor, things like murder, rape, robbery, bestiality. And the guy says, what was that last one? And my friend says, I knew I had him. He goes, bestiality. The guy says, what's that mean? And my friend says, it's actually very common, he says. Everybody does it. It's having sex with an animal. And the guy says, I may have done that 3 times. And my friend says, okay, well, like I said, everybody does it, but just so we can get past it for the purpose of the polygraph, in what cases would you have sex with an animal? The guy says, well, sometimes when I have a fight with my wife, to get back at her, I go to the barn and I bugger the horse, because it's her horse. He said he gets up on a step stool and he gets the horse. And he's like, okay, and you've done this more than once? He said, I may have done it 3 times. So he said, needless to say, they escorted him out of headquarters and took his badge and said, don't ever come back.
Yes.
But I never had to deal with anything like that. I used to, in fact, for my 5-year, I had been in like 8 years at that point, and I mentioned to one of my coworkers, I said, oh, I got to drive out to Vienna. I got my polygraph. And so his polygraph had taken 2 days because he was stuck on this question. Have you ever had unauthorized contact with a foreign intelligence service?
It's an important one.
It's an important one. So my polygraph took 40 minutes because I never did anything. And I come back, and he had gone to lunch when I was getting ready to leave for the polygraph. He came back from lunch, and I'm sitting at the desk. And he goes, dude, I thought you had a polygraph. You better get going. I said, no, I did it. I'm back. He goes, come on. I said, no, I did it. He said, I was on for 2 days, and they made me cry, he says. I said, I don't talk to Libyans at cocktail parties, which was his problem. I said, I've never done anything. I'm clean. And so that was it. I never, ever had a problem with a polygraph.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. As you could probably tell, this is a brand new channel. So if you got anything out of this at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I see every like, I read every comment, and I appreciate all of it, especially in the beginning, because as you know, that kind of support goes a long way on these platforms. So most importantly, I have some awesome guests coming up in the future for interviews. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But again, thank you for your time. Appreciate the support and hope to see you again soon.